welcome back to From the Belly. I've been really looking forward to this episode. I look forward to every episode. We're about, I think we're close to 29 episodes. I should count. I've never been very good at math, but I should count to see. But I think this might be the 29th episode under the big tent of Why Not Church or maybe Why Church. And I had that flipped for a while. I had Why Church or maybe Why Not Church. And my wife, who is really phenomenal with words, she said, you got to flip that. You got to flip that. And I was like, oh, really? So I flipped it and went, that's it. So I can imagine it sounds like this to somebody. I'm talking to somebody out in the street and I say, well, why not church? Why not? And they come back at me, which I totally understand because I've been in that space not too long ago. I would have been the one to ask, why church? So I think it's a very important. I've got brother Brady Radford. Um, I could tell a story about how I met Brady, but that's more my story, and we want to get into Brady's story. Brady, welcome.
Thanks, Doug. I'm happy to be here. I look forward to sharing this time together.
Man, I tell you, I've been looking forward to it. I got some questions to ask you. I know a little bit about your journey, but I want to know more. Just to let you all know, I spent a week uh, with Brady a week and a half, 2 weeks ago in Hopewell, Georgia, which is south of Atlanta, at the Calvin Center. Wow, what a welcoming, beautiful space. Don't get freaked out by the Calvin Center. Like a quick story, my wife will probably get all over me on this one, but I
Hampton,
told,
Georgia, by the way. Hampton, Georgia.
oh, is it Hampton? That's right, Hampton. Sorry, not Hopewell, but Hopewell sounds good. Maybe that's why I never could find the weather. I'm like, what's going on here? There's no, I don't know if there's a Hopewell, Georgia or not, Brady. So my wife, when I got there and we got settled, I called her and she said, now tell me again where you are. I said, well, I probably said Hopewell, Georgia. And she said, so where? And I said, well, I'm at this Presbyterian. And she said, I know. What's the name of that place again if I need to get in touch with you? I said, the Calvin Center. She said, I think I told you this, Brady. And Lori's going to get on me about this. She
Yeah.
said, like, like John Calvin? And I said, yeah, like John. She goes, like, you're going to be studying John Calvin? And I'm like, no, no, no. It's John Calvin gets a bad rap. So, anyways, that's where we were. And we were talking about transitional ministry. And I learned so much from Brady and from Jessica. Remind me of Jessica's last name, Brady.
Jessica Dixon Ebner.
Whew. Man, I tell you, you two together, we watched pilot, co-pilot, co-pilot, pilot. You guys changing chairs, and we had 8 people alongside and under Jessica and Brady's teaching. God, I learned so much about church and about ministry and about being a human being, about being human in that space. So I'm going to read a little bit of your bio, Brady.
Sure.
Oh, first of all, so I gave the date and time, and it's Wednesday morning, and I'm in McMinnville, Oregon, and what I guess you would say is my studio. Brady, you got some really cool artwork surrounding you. You want to tell us really quickly where you are?
Good thing. I'm logging in this morning from West Helena, or Helena, West Helena, Arkansas, which is my hometown. I'm from the state of Arkansas. And behind me, you see several of the program covers from the King Biscuit Blues Festival, which is this town is in the Mississippi Delta. So just
Mm.
about 300 yards behind where I'm sitting in this library is the Mississippi River. So right on the Mississippi River, this small town of working class people used to be cotton country and soybean farms in a lot of this area. We have an annual King Biscuit Blues Festival,
Mm.
and major blues figures come every
Yes.
month of October. And so this has been a part of my formative experience since the early 80s. And I'm happy to be here logging
Cool.
in with your audience.
And you're visiting family because you
Yeah,
live in Georgia.
I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm visiting my mom and
Mm.
my sister here in the city of Helena, Arkansas.
What's the population roughly of Helena?
Population now is roughly 12,000. Its city's changed tremendously since I was here. We had a number of middle schools. Now we have one. Had a single high
Mm.
school, but economic depression has been a factor here, and so
Mm.
some of the places that were part of my childhood, they're either closed down or a building has been dilapidated, unfortunately. So
Church on every corner. That's what people think about the South.
well, not quite church on every corner, but there are the mainline churches. So we used to be called the Twin Cities. Helena and West Helena were twin
Mm.
cities. So there's a Presbyterian and Methodist church and Baptist church on the corner in Helena, and there's a Presbyterian and a Baptist and a Methodist Church on the corner in West Helena, and usually they're right around each other, so they're in fellowship. But there's also the distinction.
And then there's a lot of the non-mainline, the Pentecostal and
Non-denominational.
charismatic and all kind of flavors.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not a big city. I mean,
Hmm, hmm.
we have a main highway that flows through, so about 12,000 people, but it feels like small town. Very slow pace,
Slow
about
pace.
35 miles per hour driving through the city. It's been a refreshing pace over these last 3 days to slow down.
Come back and slow down. Brady, is there always a fear of being flooded if you're that close to the Mississippi River?
Well, no, we have a levee here, and I would think, let's see, going back in time, I don't recall in my time here there being a major flood. There have been
Man.
times when the water on the other side of the levee has kind of come up, but
Hmm.
it's not a constant worry or fear for us. Wasn't in my time.
I grew up pretty close to, no, I was, sorry, I didn't grow up close to the Mississippi River. I grew up close to the Ohio River, which it was great, great fishing. I had a dear friend who's no longer with us, but I remember him telling me how good the fishing was. And I said, John, that's a really, the pollution in that river. He
Mhm.
said, oh, yeah, it's heavily polluted, but good fishing.
Yeah, no, I can't qualify the fishing on the Mississippi River, but the Arkansas River,
The
I've been
Arkansas River,
fishing there
that's
several times.
really interesting. All
About an
right.
hour away. Yeah, good fishing growing up. My family enjoyed the pastime of fishing.
The Reverend Brady Radford is a licensed professional counselor and minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church USA, a native of West Helena, Arkansas. Brady's completed graduate degrees from the Interdenominational Theological Center. He received an MDiv in Psychology of Religion and Pastoral Care in 2007, as well as Georgia State University, a master's in rehabilitation counseling in 2013. This is a man who knows the clergy space, and this is a man who knows what happens in the four walls of a therapy room, what happens in that room. Brady spent the last two decades preaching, teaching, and helping others experience meaningful relationships with God, themselves, and others. He has served in various multicultural and multi-generational congregational spanning from South Carolina to Florida. And I learned from Brady the most important thing in his life, correct me if I'm wrong, Brady, is your family. And so introduce us to your family before we launch into your journey.
Sure, I love to make sure that I say my first ministry is to my family. My wife of 17 years, Celestine, and our three children, Anaya, Braden, and Kalia. And we recently added a family puppy, Ranger Radford. Ranger Isaiah Radford is his name,
Mm,
to be complete. He's a Cavapoo puppy. He's 3 years old now.
all right.
Yeah.
Is that the first like dog for the
Yeah,
family?
it's the first family pet. It took us a few years to convince my wife, and almost immediately she became
She's
his primary caregiver, and he loves to be right under her.
that's great, man. So this intersection of the psychological realm and the clergy realm, be it the spiritual formation work and the things that go on within a church. Brady, what brought you into the field of mental and emotional health?
I guess if I had to answer that question, I would say it's been lived experience. Parker Palmer has a great book called Let Your Life Speak. I have the chance to use it with seminary students over at Candler School of Theology and some of my work with the institution. And I think there's no better way to say it than really listening to my life.
Mm,
Being a undergrad student at Tennessee State University, I was led to a new church development called the Village Church in Nashville, Tennessee. This is a small church in the largest public housing facility of Nashville. And there I got a chance to meet a pastor who was serious about loving people and teaching people. And it's sort of in that space that I got a chance to meet God all over again. Well, I should say meet God for myself. I
mm,
remember I'm an identical twin. And
mm,
so my brother was invested in the church first, and he would be there all the time. And I said, well, God, if I'm going to get to know you, I want it to be real. I want it to be authentic. I grew up in a Baptist church, and I've seen the people who catch the Holy Ghost every Sunday, almost 5, 4, 3. There's Sister So and so. I don't want that kind of relationship with you. I really want an authentic relationship with you.
mm,
And so if I stand up and say amen, or I shout or I clap, I want it to be something I really feel. And
mm.
so my request, or I'd say my prayer was, I want to have an authentic relationship with you. And I found God to faithfully respond to that request. And so, in the midst of that small church, new church development, we would put down chairs and pick up chairs and hook up speakers and do all of the business of setting things up. I had a chance to, experience God's responding to that request in a real way. And that sort of ballooned into learning more about my faith and having a chance to watch a really great leader at work while also being curious about the next steps that God could be directing for my life. So eventually discerned a call to ministry in early 2002 and began looking at a seminary in Johnson C. Smith Theological Seminary in Atlanta, which was at that time a part of the ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center. It was the place that I was led. And as I got into seminary, I was in a consortium setting. So there were students from 7 different denominations. Some students were already pastoring churches. And one of the things that I started to see early on is that, man, there are a lot of ways to pastor churches. I know the experience that I've seen in my grandfather, who was a Baptist minister of 65 years, my uncle, who was a Baptist minister of 50 plus years. I've seen my family's version of ministry, but I got to see different levels and kinds of leadership. And one of the things that became really clear is that, man, it's an awesome responsibility to lead God's people. Text for me in seminary, where 69 out of 100 new students were all right out of college. We were new young adult ministers. One of the things that I saw in some of the context that we're in is that a lot of us were serving churches, but we were also navigating adulting, navigating life, navigating the pressures of showing up for others while also trying to show up for ourselves. And so in a sense, I started to see that, wait, there are a lot of people leading, and there are a lot of layers of support that don't exist for those people who are leading. I counted myself to be college 2.0 as I entered seminary, but I saw some colleagues who were struggling to pay for their seminary education while also caring for a family and being in a situation where they could be assigned to a church 4 hours away this year, and next year 2 hours away in the opposite direction. And I just began to wonder, how do you make it as a leader caring for others when there's so much that you have to care for at home as well? So the broader question became, who's paying attention to the needs of pastors and their families, or clergy persons and their families? Some of my colleagues were in places where they were just exhausted and struggling to make ends meet as they were serving God's people. And others were in personal life crisis, if I'm just being frankly honest with you. And somehow my door kind of became the place where people say, hey, man, you could stop by Brady's room. His door is open. He'll listen. And I don't really know where that came from beyond there used to be some moments in the life of that early church with my pastor where he said, hey, man, let's take a ride. And, we start reflecting on how things were going at the church, what felt like it was stressful and was a lot to bear and carry. And so I think implicitly I kind of began functioning as a listening presence for leaders. And as I entered seminary and was surrounded by more leaders, many of whom were my peers at that point, it became a space that started to kind of carve itself out. And so by the time I ended seminary, I said to my mentor, I said, Doc, I think I want to go and get a counseling degree, because it really doesn't seem like there's anyone who's available to care for pastors. And that may be where God is calling me. My journey through learning Greek and learning Hebrew, it was good, but nothing was as exciting as when I sat in a family systems theory class, and it felt like my entire life began to make sense. As I started learning about Boehmian theory and family systems, I literally said, wow, I think I found my place.
Back to let your life speak, right? I mean, it sounds like it was just this real life experience for you.
Yeah. I'll just say this part. Before then, a lot of friends early on would say, Brady, I think you're thinking about it too much. Man, it's not really that complicated. But when I started understanding how family systems theory intermeshed with things like Rogerian theory and Jungian shadow work, when I started to learn about those things, I said, wait, there are people who think like this, who see the world through the lens of patterns and systems. I mean, I felt like I knew where I was supposed to be, and I wanted more of it. if I'm frankly honest.
So the friends that said you were overthinking it, are you saying actually you weren't overthinking it? That was them thinking you were making it too complicated? Or are you saying actually you were making it too complicated and you were able to see something outside of the complication? Which would that be more of?
I think it was more of I wasn't overthinking it. I was moving in the way that my mind naturally
Mm,
flowed. My mind,
mm,
I recognize patterns. I think in systems.
mm-hmm,
And maybe because I'm an identical twin, I entered the world as part of a system. Who knows? But, I've been intrigued by questions of what happens if we're all fighting for our way. I mean, eventually somebody either has to give in or we've got to figure out how collaboration works. I was a person as a young elder in the church who would say, wait, we've had this conversation before. In fact, we had it 2 months ago, and I thought we made a decision, and I'm seeing this pattern repeat
mm,
itself. And so being in that family systems course gave me a sense of community and courage, even to trust in the way my mind processed the world and know that there's a place for the way I see things. And that was liberative in so many ways.
mm,
And and so literally the books being an outlier, I think is part of it. Gladwell has that book about outliers.
mhm,
I didn't
mhm.
have that language at that time, but finding a sense of community gave me a little bit more comfort with being an outlier for some of my friend groups who were saying, you're thinking about it too much. And so, to the person who may be an outlier now, I would say, trust your path because your path may be leading you to a place to where God is showing you different ways of being helpful for God's kingdom. And for me, that has been getting to a space where I'm building the clinical resources, the relational resources, the spiritual resources necessary to to make a difference in the lives of those people who make a difference in the lives of others through pastoral ministry and nonprofit leadership, sort of where I hang my hat these days.
Yeah, because I said to you during our week at some point, I said, man, how many Brady's are there? Because there's a lot of spaces that you fill. And I know, getting to know you, I know that they're all intersected, but they are different spaces, maybe with a different title or a different credential or whatever. So, in regards to pastoral work, let's think about for a moment, let's think about a pastor who doesn't do anything outside of his or her congregation, meaning they don't do speaking tours. Maybe they do trainings, but they're more participatory in the trainings. They don't conduct the trainings. They just don't do that. Not in any way to say there's a problem with that, not so ever. But let's just talk about that pastor who it's just like the majority of their work, be it 7 to 5, 8 to 5. It's clearly not banking hours. Those don't exist any longer. But the pastor who is available almost full time to the people of that congregation. How important is sitting with people and doing some form of what one might call spiritual formation with one person, the way you and I meet with people in our therapy context? How important is it for the pastor to not be therapist, but essentially to be doing deep therapeutic work, but to do spiritual formation with the people that you then preach to and the people that you sit in staff meetings with, and you got to figure out the building and you got to figure out how to put
Mm-hmm.
paint on the walls and all that. But what about this sitting with people thing?
Well, my mind goes a number of places when you ask the
Please.
question that way. Instantly, I become concerned for that leader because I'm telling you, my
Oh, wow. Let's hear
call
about that.
is about how I think about how the person who sits with so many is often someone who has been trained by their original family system to care for others, often at the expense of caring for themselves. And so I think a pastor has as many job descriptions as pastor has as many job descriptions as they do have members. Every member wants something different from the pastoral leader. And so, in terms of the one on one setting, I think it's limited with how much a pastor can do realistically, who are reaching for that kind of one on one. So, for instance, as I was a new member of the church in Nashville,
Mhm.
somehow God gave me a thirst for sort of being at the church. So, I would go to class from 8 to noon and from 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. was at the church, kind of the right hand and the left hand of the pastor. And they were what are we doing next? Whether we're going have Bible study in the community or cleaning somebody's bathroom, just that was a ministry that was sort of in the in service to a community. And so, if the pastoral leader is developing additional leaders, I think that's reasonable. That's sort of the conversation between Moses and his father. Like, you have to train additional leaders, and I might have misquoted that, but because
Mm.
I love sacrifice themselves and their families at the altar of ministry, and
Mm.
I just don't know that feels or looks sustainable for me in 2026. And yeah.
Would you say that sitting with people and doing the spiritual formation, spiritual direction piece, not as a business, and again, nothing against that, but just with the people that maybe we'll use the word shepherding. Are you saying that that can be very consumptive, that can really consume, along with all the other things that a pastor has to do, that can be extremely consuming?
Yes, it can be consuming, but I think the other part that's ringing true for me is that I don't know that it is operational in the sense of sit down, let me make sure I'm going to do some spiritual formation with you. I think about spiritual formation in the sense of doing life. And there are
Mm.
moments where
Mm.
organically, from a pastoral leader, I think the greatest impact a pastoral leader can make given time, constraints, and commitments in the work of doing life as a community. That pastoral leader
Mm.
has a chance to model some things, and when necessary, and as the Spirit makes opportunities for, that pastor has a chance to sit in one-on-one spaces with people. But these days, I would imagine fewer opportunities for that pastoral leader to say there are 3 hours on their calendar each week to do one-on-one spiritual formation.
You're saying that's realistic and doable for in most contexts.
I'm saying that I actually think the opposite, that
Mm.
it's less realistic for the pastor to be able to do that on a continued basis, and more realistic that the pastor would have a chance to do that in terms of crafting sort of a communal relationship. So there's a small group class, and in that small group
Interesting.
class, we're
Interesting.
doing some formation as a group. I
Interesting.
really become concerned about the pastor's time in that one-on-one setting, and that's again not to limit the work that the Spirit can do in
Sure.
terms of those organic opportunities where doing ministry and life together, the formation is happening. But in the same way, I would encourage a pastor to not have repeated pastoral care sessions and such that they are doing therapy with a couple or with the family, that there needs to be some limits to that
Mm.
because the pastor has a high level commitment to the community.
Boy, you're making my mind stretch out because I've been in the room and in the chair one on one for 36 years. And I've
Mm.
seen so many things transpire. If you think about one person's life as a system, sure,
Okay.
you just see. But I remember somebody saying in a training I did a few years ago, they said, Doug, it's really difficult to scale one on one. And I was like, oh man, yeah. And I think for me, it's also owning that I'm quite saddle sore
Mm.
from the amount of the stack of hours and hours and hours. But then I never had other responsibilities because that was the job of being a therapist. But I didn't, I mean, I might have had some administrative things and whatever that I've never been very good at. And I didn't have employees and all the kind of things that some therapists do to build a practice. I just used me, but I didn't have any other leadership. So you're stretching me. So let me ask you this, Brady. Something you said a few minutes ago about your concern for the pastor.
Well, let me go.
Yeah.
Let me go on
Oh,
this.
go.
My primary concern is that we begin to reimagine a healthy version of pastoral ministry
Okay.
that
Okay. Okay.
finds a rhythm and a space between what I saw growing up and a generation of pastoral leaders that I think are at a retirement age right now. So I think there's some generational shifts that are happening in pastoral ministry. In some congregations I've served, I've seen the congregation where the pastor is the life of the church. The pastor is a hub through which everything in this church runs through. And that was a successful season of ministry for many congregations who organized themselves in that way. However, the pastors who are emerging from seminaries and the pastors who are showing up to apply for the position that pastor leaves in that vacancy, they're not signing up to be the hub
Mm.
for the entire community because they recognize that they're called to ministry in some ways. Maybe they believe, like I believe, that their first ministry is to their family, versus some of the things I watched in my mentors. Their first ministry was to the church, and
Hmm.
occasionally it was at the expense of their family. And I've seen the aftermath of that. And somewhere in my theological framing, I don't believe that that's what God is most pleased with in terms of today that, hey, sacrifice yourself or your family at the altar of ministry.
Oh, that's interesting, Brady. So you're not saying, hey, it's the reason I, Brady, kind of see it this way. It's not, tell me if I get this right.
Okay.
It's not so much, I, Brady, it's not so much that I just see the consequences of that, but actually, alongside the consequences, theologically, it's off.
Yeah.
Not just in practice, it doesn't work very well, but we should still aspire for it because theologically, that's what a pastor is supposed to be. I hear you saying, oh, theologically, it maybe never was meant to be that. Wow,
Yeah.
that's a shift. So when you said a few minutes ago, it doesn't work these days. I think maybe you already fleshed out since you said that. But what does that mean these days?
These days, I mean that in our contemporary context, I don't believe that there are people who are showing up to ask the pastor to have the answer. I think people are showing up to ask the pastor to be capable of a conversation that helps them
Hmm.
discover the answer that God, along with the pastor, their spiritual support, and the Holy Spirit is leading them to. And so I think we're out of the expert model, period. I think that fewer people are
Hmm.
showing up saying, hey, can you be the expert spiritually? Can you be the expert psychologically? I mean, as part of our clinical training, we're not trained to give people answers. We're trained to resource with them and walk with them as they find resources and solutions that are in them and around them. And we offer resources.
Hmm.
We're not positioning ourselves to be the resource. I think that more and more the students that I work with at Candler, students that I've had a
Oh,
chance to
yeah.
work with at Columbia, as these are being trained for ministry, I'm encouraging them to not try to be the source, but to help remind people that God is the source, and that
Hmm.
we're part of the signs that point to the source, but we're working back from that pastor as the answer instead of pastor as the
You, that reminds me, Brady, and I told you this during our week together. Every once in a while, and it didn't feel planned or programmed to me, but it came from a very natural place within you. But there were times where you reminded us that it's not about us being the source. Um, we're messaging, but God is the source, and that was really it's such a simple model. Simple doesn't mean easy. I had a client one time, I'll never forget. I was like 3 years into the work, and we were doing some work, and I said to her, that's I either said simple or easy, and she about came off the couch, and she said, "Excuse me for a minute, let me correct you." And it was a good correction. She said it might be simple. I know I was confusing simple and easy. She
mm,
said it might be simple in regards to being able to see what needs to be done here, but easy. Excuse me for a minute, and I had gotten those
yeah.
confused. So I appreciated you bringing us, and I feel like that's what you're doing even now is bringing it back to.
Let's talk about simple and easy a little bit
Oh,
more.
please.
So I'll try to build a bridge between these two things. Simple for us to know that there are crises all around us and we need to respond to the crises. But it's not easy to determine how we do that over a sustained period of time. And so recently I've been having a conversation with some colleagues and some of the students about not confusing the energy of crisis and the energy of call. That right
Mm.
now, with the way things are happening in Minneapolis and in our social standings, there are a lot of crises to respond to. And there are a lot of people, a lot of ministry leaders in good faith who want to show up to the crisis. And we need them to. But if we're not careful, the simple response of showing up to the crisis will over time become this practice of responding to crisis, responding to crisis, responding to crisis, responding to crisis. And what happens on the other side of that is eventually people burn out
Mm.
and they're left with the dissonance of why don't I have the energy to show up to this next crisis that's in front of me when it's clear that it's a crisis, it's urgent, and I want to respond, but there's something in me that's not allowing me to show up. And I think from the work that I've had a chance to do back in the early teen 12, 13 with Black Lives Matter, it became really clear that there's a
Mm.
response that comes out of crisis. But if you work that out over time, it leaves us in a really interesting place when now there's more and more crises. There are more and more crises to show up to, but the sense of call and respond, the sense of energy to respond to those crises, it's somehow getting lost.
Hmm.
And so I've thought about that through the lens of how do we clarify the energy of crisis and the energy of call. The energy of call is about me showing up to be faithful with the resources, with the energy, with the presence of the Spirit. And that means that I want to be there in the midst of crisis, but that may not mean that I can play the same role in every crisis because
Mm,
I am a finite being. And so I think we have to be realistic with
that's
ourselves,
good. That's
have
good.
to be realistic with communities of faith. So, yeah, I don't know that that conversation is completely fleshed out in that I've seen all that God intends to show me in relationship to this crisis of crisis and energy of call dynamic. But it's something that I'm chewing on because I think without having this conversation, what we end up with is we end up.
Boy, thank you. Not to set up a congregation as being uh, a bullying presence to a pastor. But let's think of a progressive space where all the things that are happening with ICE and all the things, I mean, all the crises that you speak of, they're just layered upon layered upon layered upon layered upon. And we know more are coming, and they're going to be more of the same or they're going to be new. So let's say a well intentioned group of people, a congregation in a church, that are progressive in nature and want to speak truth to power. They use that language.
Mm-hmm.
We speak truth, and we want to rally, we want to protest, and let's say it's done not with flamethrowers. It's done well. What's the pressure on the pastor to be the leader of that? And if they begin to say, no, wait a second, I'm not going to show up with the same hat and suit on every time to be the leader in this place and to keep it going. I'm actually going to say, I'm not going to go today, or I'm not going to embody that today. What's the pressure that a pastor, what's the pushback from a progressive, well meaning congregation? What's that like for a pastor to say, wait a second, wait a second. I mean, just let's slow down here. Let's process. Are we in that response mode?
I don't know that I have a direct answer to the question in terms of what's the
What
pressure
do
on.
you imagine, Brady? What do you
What's
imagine?
the opportunity, though? I think the opportunity
Okay.
there, I think the opportunity for the pastoral leader there is to practice, potentially model a level of agency and awareness that's not common right now. Here's what I mean. Oftentimes, when the well-meaning congregation who's attempting to speak truth to power shows up, they're sort of okay. What are the markers? So we need to have a protest, and we need to make signs, and we need to do this. There are these functions to perform and these roles to fulfill.
There we go.
And after you've done that a number of times in a number of crises, you have to begin to ask yourself, wait, are we answering the right question? And are we serving at the point of of our greatest impact? And so, for a pastoral leader, I think there's the expectation that you're going to show up to some of that, and you should because it's meaningful in the life of your faith community. However, there's also an opportunity for the pastoral leader to ask to not just keep working in what's called the first order set of dynamics, but maybe begin
Mm,
tending toward a second order change. And second order change may look like asking a new question that puts us that takes us off the dance floor. I'm gonna talk a little bit of Heifetz stuff.
yeah.
Takes us off the dance floor and puts us in the balcony to look at the same dynamic, but to see it from a different vantage point. So that maybe our task is not to be at the protest, but to be ready with 100 people who are willing to sit for a phone bank and call the congresspersons or to write these letters, that there are
Mm,
different functions, each different functions that we're all gifted and perfectly positioned to serve. And that we have to find what's
mm,
an authentic use of our agency, not just, hey, what's the role that everyone who says they
hmm.
care about this issue, what are they doing? Okay, let's go and do that. No, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. What are the resources that we have in this community of faith? And how can we make sure those resources are perfectly positioned? Whether that's our greatest resource right now is to provide some financial resources because we're an aging congregation, or whether it's we are a congregation that doesn't have a lot of money, but we have a lot of youth. And so here we are. All that is a long way of saying, I think the best opportunity for that pastor is to show up in the life of the community, yes, but also pray for God to give insight and awareness around
Mm.
what's the next question that we need to ask ourselves in this moment. Because if we don't, we'll recycle this pattern of showing
Hmm.
up and showing up. And my experience says that, well, eventually fewer and fewer people start showing up. And then there's guilt in the congregation for not showing up to the crisis like we
Right,
said
right.
we would. And that's a cycle that's asking for a different set of responses.
Thank you, Brady. So, Brady, what does it mean to be church in these times?
I think we're getting back to the place of church as community. I mean, and what I'd like to imagine is almost on the grassroots level, getting back to a place where church is not about designation in terms of social class standing, but really about being engaged in people's lives in a real way and doing life together as community, as a place of training and learning. I think that's the place
Training
that
and
comes from.
learning.
Yeah.
Brady, how important? I know these are big questions. How important? Because and I know that there's not a one size fits all, but in this day and time, how important is it for a church to have a permanent building?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I want to venture to have a position on that, but I'll say I think it's still important.
Okay.
I think the idea of a church having a building that's for their
Hmm.
individual isolated use, I think that day is past us. I think
Hmm.
that in some
Hmm.
cases, maybe one of the biggest gifts a congregation could give to a community is a safe place for gathering.
Oh boy. Okay, so I, I got a chill on my back. It's a goofy thing that happens in my body, man. Goodness, I've been thinking so much about that in the last 48 hours.
Doug, I want to come back to a lot of this is a lot of this can center in on for pastor and for congregation. What's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves in this moment? Are we a congregation who has more time and experience looking backwards instead of looking forwards? Are we a congregation who's continuing to define ourselves with yesterday's answers in an attempt to solve today's problems? Or are we a congregation who's interested in inviting a continued evolution of our answer to that question? Who are we? And how is God seeking to use our gifts in this place and in this time? I think if we can come back to the spiritual practice of answering that question faithfully, not successfully, because success has markers. And oftentimes in churches, we
Mm-hmm.
look for the metrics of success, which often offer comparisons. But in this case, no, we're not about success, but about faithfulness. Because sometimes there's a huge distinction between those two, successfulness and faithfulness. How are we experiencing the active move and presence of God in the life of this community as we seek to answer the question, what can God do with the gifts that are here? So I'll give you a quick story.
Please give me a good story, Brady.
In Oakhurst area of Decatur, where I live now, back during the Black Lives Matter movement, we had a Rest in Power Memorial. It was sort of how I came to this place of saying, wait, can't continue to confuse crisis and calling. The energy of crisis, the immediacy of crisis can't be confused with the steadiness of calling, the constancy of calling. There were organizers in the city who could bring together 300 people to shut down Interstate 75 and 85 in Atlanta. Easy, no problem. You could shut down a major thoroughfare in the Southeast with no problem. But there really was not a place or a container for the grief and the anger that was present in
Mm.
those moments. And as our congregation at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church at that time, and in partnership with Oakhurst Baptist, as we started to attend some of those gatherings and hold spaces, I started asking the question, wait, how do we care for the people who are showing up to do this work and who are impacted, both implicitly and explicitly, emotionally, physically impacted? We can't keep doing this without having a release valve, without having some kind of way to care for the people who are showing up to do this work. And so we ended up planning one of the most beautiful worship services I've ever been a part of. In this Rest in Power Memorial, there were grassroots organizations from all over the city. There were families who had lost loved ones
Mm.
to police violence. And it was an opportunity for us to be together in a communal service of lament and releasing grief to have some healing. That doesn't solve the political problems or the systemic issues of the day, but it was a way to metabolize the grief that
Mm.
was being felt all across the country in general, but specifically in the city of Atlanta. And it gave us an opportunity to continue in the work because otherwise people
Hmm.
and the systems and even the structures were getting burned out.
When we started today, I was looking over your bio and looking at. I think I can explain this. I understand the difference between a therapy office and a church space. I understand those are different spaces. I have a colleague who, an example is a colleague. It's kind of a strange example, I think, but it kind of makes the point. And a colleague in Seattle who is an attorney and a licensed professional counselor. And he gave me some consultation on some things. And he said, I keep those so separate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my philosophy and me as a human being is all integrated. So, I mean, when I'm doing my therapy work, on this side of the hallway, there are legal things coming up for me about ways that I think and the ways that I work with people and mediation or whatever. And then when I'm over in my legal space, but he said, I got the, literally, they're separated. They're different names. One's in that door and right across the hall, one's in that door. So I use that as if we think about a therapy office being a therapeutic space, and if we think about church as being a church place where church things are done. But I've always been uh, uncomfortable with having to even talk about let's bring mental health and emotional health and well-being into the church, because what is happening there is that those have been so separated. And I think in my mind, if you're developing spiritually and you're growing spiritually, emotional well-being
Yep.
and physical well-being and being in your body, and I mean all those things. I mean I mean they live together, but we've separated them out, and they're
Yep.
to live, man. I mean that's what I love about Henry Nouwen is he lived those integrated. I
Yeah.
mean, he would talk about his prayer life, but when he talked about his prayer life, he might as well have been teaching in a family systems or therapeutic space, but it was so integrated that he didn't have them separated. And that's the way I see
Yeah.
into these spaces.
I guess one of the ways that began to make sense for me, shout out to Pete Scazzaro and the work of emotionally healthy spirituality, that spiritual maturity and emotional maturity, that those two things are linked. But it also strikes me that maybe implicit in that approach is the belief that church things are somehow about knowledge or some type of spiritual alignment that does not have real world implications. I mean,
Yes,
at the end of the day, for me, faith is about what we believe, but it's also about how we practice our faith. How do we show up in ways that helps build the kingdom of God in this earth as it is in heaven? And so, because there's a praxis element of our faith, my capacity to practice, my capacity to make meaning out of my experiences with God, self, and other are linked to my capacity to emotionally interpret them, to spiritually understand them. And so I'm not of the bifurcated nature
oh, I know you're not.
that,
I
it
know
all
you're not.
belongs and that it is all in union with the spirit and movement of God. And so I don't want to be in a place where I'm just trusting this part to God and I'm
That's
trusting
right.
this part to
That's
myself.
right, man.
That sounds like trouble for me.
It's trouble. It's real trouble.
And I think there's meaningful work in living the integration. I should say on the other side of this, part of the work we have to do is get over the potential for getting it wrong. Most of the people in the Bible got it wrong before they got it right. And so the idea of a God who does not create space for us to misunderstand before we more completely understand. I don't know that,
It's
the thought
beautiful.
of God making space for me to learn and grow as I walk in this journey with God. I mean, that's where I want to be. I don't want to be in a place where I got to try to fix it and make it great to offer it up to God before, I earn God's presence in my life.
Yeah, that's a crude faith. One of the things and one of the takeaways for me coming out of the week of training with you, if we look at what we were doing, we were talking about transitional ministry and we were talking about leadership qualities within self and how to work those out in a community. And there are metrics and numbers and stuff in that space. But it's interesting because somebody asked me when I got back, tell me what you learned. Tell me what you learned. I spoke from two spaces. One was, man, I learned about technical solutions to adaptive challenges and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, you guys, thank you for the Google Docs, and I've been digging into those uh, to relearn that material and to really take it in. But then I said to somebody, one of the takeaways for me is that I just what we did communally together was I just said our faith is a beautiful faith.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful faith. I mean, to sit in a group and look across, and I've got somebody in mind to look across and one morning see like a level of joy on somebody's face that you cannot manufacture that. And then to see the next day somebody in tears, and I have no idea what they were weeping about. And I just go, this is beautiful. This is human and this is beautiful. And God is right here with us. It was so what you and Jessica, the way you led those spaces, the way you invited us to do work with ceramics. I've got my piece right here, and it's just become really special, man. And so it's a beautiful thing, right?
It's an amazing thing, Doug. I for a decade or more, I was a mental health support for a cancer wellness center here in Atlanta.
Mm.
Well, there in Atlanta, Piedmont Cancer Wellness. Shout out to Carolyn Helmer, who was the director of that program at the time. I walked in this place and instantly felt the spirit of God in a medical setting
Mm.
where the intention was to make sure that anyone who was living with cancer, that they and their family could receive services and support for their journey. And so this idea of being community comes back for me to this place of we are meaning making machines. And part of the way I talk about spirituality is that spirituality is us, the practice of us making meaning out of our experiences, God, self, and
Mm.
other. And as we seek to do that, we don't do that in a vacuum. We do that in community. I think we were created for community. We belong to God, and in some sense, if you can accept it, we belong to one another. This is ours to share. This lived experience is not about individual accumulation and possession. And so, our intent for the transitional ministry course, Art of Transitional Ministry, plug
Mm.
at Calvin Center,
Plug it, man.
the third week, it happens the final week of January.
Plug it.
We're doing week one, final week of January, and the final week of September is our week two course. But this course is about coming together with other ministers, with other ministry leaders, with other ministry minded individuals, and inviting them to create a cohort experience that helps us talk about how all ministry is transitional ministry, whether you're called and
Mm.
installed, or whether you're an interim transitional minister, or whether you're a seminary student, or whether you're a therapist who believes that the power of transition is active even in their lives and their clients'
Mm.
lives. We want you to be part of this container for shared learning and a shared
Mm.
experience. And it's not about expertise, it's about the experience of learning together. And that's what we intended to offer. And it sounds like that was part of your experience. So it
Oh,
does
it was
heart well to know that was accomplished.
so on the way to the airport. Tyler says something about week two. I said, "What? What? I might have missed that." He goes, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a week two."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You mean like another experience on top of what we just had?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, it's in the works." So did I hear you just say it's going to be in September?
Yeah, we're targeting week two as the end of September. So it'll be the end of January, week one, the end of September. The last full week in September is our week two. So
And
we'll
so is this inviting like, well, I if I come back, I would be with the same group, or are you merging groups?
so
Huh.
here's a plug for the entire
Plug
consortium.
it, man.
The Transitional Ministry Education Consortium is a collective of 13 sites across the country, mostly Presbyterian influenced. But these sites we're just now developing in ecumenical institutions, not yet open, so I won't say too much about it. But these are educational sites whereby we invite clergy persons from any denomination to have a week's worth of learning In week one, you're developing an understanding of the basic theories of transitional ministry.
Yes, you are.
Norman Bendroff's work, the process task of a transitional leader, the focus points of a congregation in
Oh my,
transition. We talk about things like adaptive leadership, family systems theory, conflict management. And then in our week two course, here's where the difference is.
right.
That week two course is all about process. And so you're going to get about 25% of that week spent in didactic workshops. And the other
Right.
75% of that week is spent in a small group container where
Oh
you're
boy.
getting real life leadership challenges and opportunities in what we call leadership learning labs. And that's an opportunity for you
Hmm.
and your peers to, do conceptualization work, sort of what we do in the case reflection group as therapists. But you're doing that in a group of leaders, and you're leaving with an accountability plan and an accountability partner to begin working out
Oh
some of the
wow.
solutions that came up over the course of the week.
Beautiful. So this will be in September, and this will
Mhm.
be week two, and this will be at the Calvin Center. And
Yeah,
so, okay, great. So you and I'll stay connected to that because I'm coming back.
awesome.
And then week one, we've got a few minutes left, and I want you to be able to plug. And you've done it. You've done some shout outs. If there's anything else that you want to plug, anything about your specific work with couples and those kind of things. But before we get there,
Hmm.
because I never like a good thing to end. I like to stretch it out. My wife will be like, "You're not good with endings," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." And she's like, "Sometimes you stretch it out too far. Like you'll tell a joke and then you tell a joke on top of that, and at some point the whole thing caves in." But I'm not going to let that happen to this episode. But I do want to ask you before we transition
Okay.
into shout outs, how? That's the word. I was going to ask, what does it mean? But I want to ask how. How does a community of people, a church as a congregation, how do they listen to the Spirit together? And the
Mhm.
reason I ask it that way is that a friend of mine recently, before I came to the event at the Calvin Center, a friend of mine said, "Doug, I'm struggling with something and I don't even know what I'm struggling with. I don't know if it's theological. I don't know if it's from my bent of family systems and the way I don't know." And everybody else seemed to be fine with it, but it triggered me. And I said, "Well, let's talk about it." And he said, "Why is it in the church that I attend, when I hear, and I'm in the congregation, this person, and
Hmm.
I'm a leader, but I'm not like on the session or in the American Baptist tradition. It's the church board. I'm not
Hmm.
church board. And I don't sit in any executive type of positions, but I lead a few things and I help with the soup kitchen and those kind of things." And I said, "So, okay, keep talking." And he said, "Why, when I hear about the direction of the church and what the appetite is for the church and what the church is doing to hear the Spirit's work, why do I hear about that happening in all those executive places, but the congregation is never invited into it? We're only reported about it. We're
Hmm.
told about it, but we don't get to be in it. Why is there this? Or am I just a nutty person, Doug, who wants to, what's going on for me?" And I said, "No, I think we need to keep talking about this. That is a problem." So, Brady, that's what sets up, maybe you can speak to that, but also, how does a congregation listen together to the Spirit, not just the executive leadership?
Yeah. I think there are two things there. Definitely, there's a leadership. I won't say there's a leadership challenge. I think there's a theory of leadership implicit in the congregation you're describing. There's also a theory of leadership implied in your friend's question. And
Okay.
I think the distinguishing mark between the two of those is open and closed. Simple
Mm,
answer to your question. I think the congregation listens with openness, but not all congregations are created alike in terms of, is this a closed system where information flows in one direction, or is this an open system where information flows freely? In an open system, we're invited to be part of to be aware of what's happening. In closed systems, certain people are invited. And so I
mm,
won't even intend or that there is negative intent or consequences in that. It's just that that is the way some people have been organized around leadership. I think the congregations who are able to do this work are congregations that exist as more open systems.
mm,
And those open systems are less about certainty and more about trust. And that's an interesting paradox there. The paradox between certainty and trust. To trust that we're being guided toward the solution. And even as that guidance doesn't offer immediate certainty. Gosh, so many ways this could go with our time. But one of the things we talk about in the training is that there are some congregations that don't experience failure. How could a congregation experience failure when we're an institution of God? This congregation can never fail. So everything we do, it's a success. Well, is it really? I mean, so it depends on how you see it. But what about the congregation says, "Oh no, here's what we learned the last time we did that," or "Here's what we learned this time." It's your choice as to whether or not you organize life around successes and failures. But going back to my earlier point around faithfulness, that didn't turn
Faithfulness.
out the way we hoped it would turn out. But we showed up faithfully to that work, and here's what we learned
We
in the
learned.
process. So I think in order for a congregation to do that, there has to be an emphasis somewhere in the congregation. It doesn't even have to exist with the pastoral leader. I think there has to be a contingent of individuals who have the cultural capital, who have the level of integrity and influence that suggests more of an open system. And oftentimes, those open systems can even encourage and assist the pastor in opening up. Because I wouldn't assume that the pastor would be a closed leader without there being a functional reason why he, or they might show up as a closed leader.
And then we could talk about it, and we could. There's a lot of different directions, as you say, because it's got a lot of layers. But we could talk about, that could be beneficial. I mean, beneficial to the pastor because of control, but also that can be, wow, you talk about burnout, right? You're talking about,
Time consuming.
and it all feeds back to one person. All right, man. Goodness. Well, we've been together. We've been together for well over 60 minutes, man. Shout outs, Brady, or connections to your work, to people that are listening. Go for it.
All right. So it's been a delight to be here with you. Again, I'm Reverend Brady Radford. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. I primarily work with couples and clergy leaders. So I have the joy of helping people get married and stay married if that's their goal. And I have the joy of helping pastors deal with the demands of ministry. Also, occasionally work with nonprofit leaders and systems who are going through transition. If you're interested in connecting with me, you can find me on social media at Brother Brady, or also my business is called the Love Well Collective. I mean, that's what I aim to do: help couples learn how to love well, help leaders learn how to lead well, so that they're balancing their lives and their families as well as the institutions that they serve. If you're a minister who's thinking about transitional ministry or leading a congregation through transition, we'd love to have you join us at Calvin Center, calvincenter.org. We have week 1 trainings at the end of January and week 2 trainings at the end of September each year. Week 2 does have the prerequisite that you've attended week 1 and at least had 6 months to live with the knowledge and resources you're exposed to in week 1 before you enroll in week 2. Otherwise, I'm just excited about how God continues to use ordinary people for extraordinary things. And I am grateful for the connection that we've had a chance to make and enjoy, Doug. And I truly believe God is up to something wonderful.
It's been beautiful. Brady, thank you. You stretch me. You stretch me, man. Just thank you. So hang with me here while we close out. We want to make sure everything uploads because we don't want to lose any of it. And we just want to, any of the folks that were in week 1 with me, we just want to do a collective shout out.
Yeah.
To all of you. One of those people, we won't name that individual, but they're going to be coming up in probably the next episode. That'll be interesting. That person they were introduced the last night when we had our banquet. They were introduced basically as a modern day Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
The heat just coming out.
Fire child.
Fire, man. So I might have to have a hard hat on when I do that interview.
Make sure you keep a little water close by as well.
That's right. There we go. There we go. Brady, thank you for sharing the time. I wish you well in your home state, in your hometown. And may you, I know your life is not built around safety, but may you stay safe. Yeah. In these crazy, wacky times. So God bless you, Brady. Thank you for being with From the Belly.
Sure thing. Thank you, Doug. Blessings to you and your listeners.